Welcome to the Fantastic Earth podcast, where we delve into the natural, supernatural, and human wonders of the world. Tonight, we go behind the scenes of world building in books, movies, and video games. Can an epic fantasy be real? And how does an empty page turn into The Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, or The Witcher? Stick around as we explore the success of some of the great epic fantasies out there, as well as famous and lesser-known movies that achieved storytelling greatness so powerful they can change your life. This and more with author Dylan Devine coming up next on Fantastic Earth. Listen to the entire podcast for free on YouTube or Spotify, and also a bunch of other places. Check the links below, pick your favorite, and boom, you're done. Also, please subscribe to the channel and smack a like if you're enjoying it so far. And why not join the conversation in the comments section below? Do it. I dare ya. And welcome back. I am here with Dylan Devine. Dylan is a writer. He's the author of the novel A Spurious Hanging, which you can find on Amazon and Kindle. However, all future publications will be through Ingram Spark, which will make them available on Amazon and in bookstores. He's also the author of various gaming articles for Exclusively Games, which unfortunately is not up anymore. He's also written plenty of essays for his website Writing is Like Life, which will be linked below, and he's currently working on his next novel titled Enid the Soul Keeper. You can find Dylan on Parler under the handle The Chosen Undead, also linked below, and he will be moving primarily to Minds under the same handle sometime soon. Dylan, welcome to the Fantastic Earth podcast.
Thank you, and what a fantastic intro.
Well, you know, that's how we do it here. You, my friend, are a busy man.
These days, a little more than I'd like.
But you're being able to focus on your writing? Is that like your main focus these days? Can you do that?
As much as possible. So it's like, for example, so I'll try to manage it. The common writing advice that most people give would be to write every single day, although most will tell you that this is actually kind of unsustainable. You burn yourself out very quickly doing that. Mm-hmm. So I generally aim for like 5 days a week. So it's like, I'll try to do 7 days a week, but if I miss 1 or 2, it's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm. And what would be your schedule, your writing schedule? Do you go like a full-time job, 8 hours a day?
Unfortunately not. I would love to do that, but I do have bills to pay and I don't make any money yet. So, so I work a regular day job, and what I do is I usually wake up around 4 or 4:30 in the morning, and I'll usually write or edit for maybe about 30 minutes before work. Then after work, when it's time to wind down and everyone else goes to sleep, then I get another half hour or an hour to myself. So I can usually guarantee about an hour a day. But even if you only have an hour a day to write, that's generally enough. So this is something that people in the publication industry have done the math on. Let's say if someone's writing an epic fantasy, which is, epic fantasy is much longer than most regular novels. A novel is generally around 80,000 words, and an epic fantasy is going to be around 200,000 words. Yeah. But if you could, the average person can write about between 200 and 500 words per hour. If they're not just typing random characters, that is. So at that speed, you could generally type 500 words times 5. So you could write at least a few thousand words a week times 4 times 12. You could generally write a novel in about a year, maybe a year and a half, and then you can edit a novel in about a year and a half. So most people can write and publish a novel within 2, maybe 3 years, even if it's a long epic fantasy.
You know, I wish you hadn't told me that because I've been writing. Now I feel like I'm procrastinating, which I probably am. I've been writing a couple of books myself over the past 5-10 years. Well, it's actually 3 books. And I keep going back and forth between them. I cannot maintain that sort of discipline, and that is on me. Also because everybody needs to pay bills.
I totally get it.
Yeah, you gotta make choices. So you sacrifice one thing to uphold the other. But I can't maintain like the 1 hour a day. However, that being said, I would probably need at least 2 hours. Whenever I sit down to write, I usually go 4 hours because the first hour, I don't know if this happens with you, it's just to get in the zone.
Yeah, you're talking, you're preaching to the choir there. And when I was talking to you earlier, this was before the podcast. We were talking about, I was mentioning the Brandon Sanderson lectures that he has on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
I highly recommend those to everybody. And one thing he talks about is how he has to like fight tooth and nail for his time, because if he wants to write for an hour, he actually has to have 2 hours. If he wants to write for 3 hours, he actually has to have an hour and a half or 2 hours, because it takes like 40 minutes to an hour to get into the zone. And then if someone comes in and says, hey, can you pick the kids up from school real quick? And right, you had just gotten into the zone, your zone is shattered, and now you've gotten no progress done. And any remaining time is going to be spent trying to get back into that zone. So yeah, with me, what I found is that I get into the zone a lot quicker if it's really early or really late and there's no one else awake.
Yeah, and
it just expedites that process.
That is also a problem for me because I got too used to working at night, which means it's fairly common for me to go all the way into 5, 6 in the morning, and then that bit that Seinfeld has, but it's the perpetual quarrel between night guy and morning guy, which is basically the same guy. Oh, that's morning guy's problem. I'm night guy. I do whatever I want. And yeah, that's basically my life. When I start working, I love writing at night. There's something about the nighttime, isn't there? Yeah,
that's a really good point. And I've had my own different, but essentially the same way of looking at it. I looked at it as past versus present or versus future me. So if I have usually just future. So I'll say, I don't have to do this. I'll let future Dylan worry about it. And then future Dylan says, screw you, past Dylan. How dare you do this to me?
Yeah. Listen, I'm sure you're the same. I'm looking right now at one of my shelves here, my bookshelves, and I have so many folders that are full to the brim with ideas that I never got to explore. And by the way, these are ideas that were the ones that survived my brutal hacking of the ones that I didn't want. So I'm looking at this and I'm looking at my life and I'm like, there's too much procrastinating, which isn't procrastinating, but because we're not doing the things that we really want to do, it feels like procrastinating, right?
Yeah, and then it's also a matter of like imposter syndrome to some extent, because let's say you carefully weigh all of your options and your ideas and you decide, okay, this is the one I really want to do. And then halfway through, you're starting to look at the other side of the fence where you're like, would it have been better if I'd chosen that one? And then you start reminiscing about the idea, and then you start doubting yourself. And so it's kind of just a matter of being incredibly stubborn with yourself, I would say. It's like you have to be ruthless. You have to say, no, I'm sticking with this no matter what. Because otherwise we're just going to keep bouncing back and forth and nothing will ever get done.
Yeah, I have 2 ideas to throw your way. One by way of Woody Allen and the other by way of Robert Mckee. Woody Allen says, I don't rewrite my scripts. If I rewrite my script, I'm just going to write a whole new script. So might as well just write a whole new script.
Yeah, that's what Sanderson said with his books. He said he wrote like 13 books, but none of them got published. And the reason why he wrote dozens of books before any of them got published was because he didn't want to sit back down and edit and revise the current one. He just wanted to say, I'll just make the next book better.
Yeah.
Well, of course, that's not very practical. In his case, it only worked out because he learned how to stop doing that and how to revise. But it's kind of the same note.
So Robert McKee's turn. Do you know? I'm pretty sure you know who Robert McKee is.
No, but I can Google him really quickly.
No, it's fine. I'll tell you. Robert McKee is basically a story teacher. That's, I guess, would be the best way to describe what he does. He is very famous for, within the circles that he walks in, within the circles he walks. Anyway, great English here. But anyway, so he's very famous for teaching writers how to craft an engaging story. And this goes from creating fully fleshed out characters to choices that those characters make that then influence the rest of the story and influence the development of the plot. But it has to be credible from the perspective of the character and also within the world that you're building. So he's very insightful, I would say. And there's a book called Story by Robert Mckee that has a lot of insightful notes that I took on my little notebook and I revisit from time to time just to get my head straight. And one of them is this: creativity will respond to discipline. This in response to the constant, like you were saying, the constant self-doubt that writers have about, oh, am I making the right choice? Am I not making the right choice? Well, like you said, you said that it's easier for you to get in the zone. I would say one of the reasons it's easier for you is because you write every day. You don't really leave the zone for that long, right?
Yes, although that being said, I do have my stupid rituals. And that is something I see a lot of the pros talk about. They're like, there are no such things as rituals. Rituals don't work. I have not 100% found those to be true, although I understand the conventional wisdom behind what they're saying. So what they're talking about is how people make writing excuses like, I can't write yet. I haven't made a coffee with exactly 3 cups of sugar or 3 spoons.
Oh,
of sugar.
yeah.
3 cups would be too much. Maybe not for me, but
yeah.
So they'll be like, oh, sorry, the conditions aren't perfect. I need it to be exactly 72 degrees in here, and it's 71.5 degrees. I can't write.
Yeah, so that's borderline OCD, so I'm not sure it's going to be efficient.
So that's generally what they're talking about is making those petty excuses for not writing. I'll still write even if it's kind of inconvenient most of the time, but I do understand why these rituals exist. So it's like one of the rituals for me is I have to be hydrated. It's like if I'm even slightly thirsty, it just is incredibly distracting.
Yeah,
so
it is. Yeah.
There are little things here and there that can easily prevent you from getting quite in the zone. But even when I'm not in the zone, it's like, okay, I'm not going to be as productive, but I'm still going to power through this hour and see what I can crank out. So it's like maybe instead of 500 words, it's 350 words, but 350 words is still a lot better than 0. You see what I mean? Yeah,
of course. I gotta admit, I also have my little ritual, which is basically just one. And that is, well, 2, but one is probably a condition, not necessarily a ritual. The condition is if I have any expectation that I'm going to be interrupted, I don't write. Because I don't want to be interrupted, but that's basically it. So I just shut out the entire world and then I sit down to write. But the ritual itself is I have a cup of coffee, a good cup of coffee, and then I always have next to me a pot of tea, like a full pot, that one that lets you go for 2 or 3 cups. So that keeps me hydrated. It keeps me, when I need to look away from the page, I can just grab a bit, my pot, fill my cup, and that kind of helps me function, I would say. I want to ask you, does creativity respond to discipline? Does your experience confirm this idea?
Oh, absolutely. And a large part of it, I think you could even go into things like Pavlovian conditioning to some extent.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, the coffee, I do the coffee thing too. I don't always have a pot of tea next to me. However, I think something like that works because if every time you sit down to write, your brain is rewarded with whatever energy and taste you get from the coffee, then you start to associate sitting down and working with the chemical response in the brain from getting your cup of coffee. So that's why sometimes in the morning I won't get my coffee unless I open my laptop first, because there's this old wise sort of maxim or saying, if you will, and it's that you don't have to do something, you just have to start it. So it's like, let's say there's a sink full of dishes. If you tell yourself, wow, that's a lot of dishes, I don't want to do that, you're not going to do it. If you say, I'm just going to turn on the water and wash 1 cup, and then you start that, then it's like, well, I might as well finish because I've already got my foot in the door. Like, it's a lot easier to finish what you've already started. So you don't have to look at it as tackling the whole thing. Just look at it as starting the very first step of that thing, and then the rest will just kind of follow. Because it's a lot harder to back out and justify why you started doing the dishes if you've already started doing the dishes.
Oh, that's a very interesting notion. So instead of making a big decision that involves climbing a mountain, you just make one small decision to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I'm not going to, so I don't have to tell myself I'm going to write 500 words before I go to work. I tell myself, and have my cup of coffee, I tell myself, I'm just going to turn on my laptop and open my word processor and stare at it for 5 seconds.
Yeah, interesting. I kind of think of it that way.
The task is kind of inevitable from that.
Yeah, I kind of think of it that way, but in different terms. It's pretty much the same thing, but it's about the environment. So I'm just going to sit there and put on a really good piece of music that can help me reach that zone. And that's it. I'm just going to sit with a cup of tea and listen to music. And then obviously the rest comes up. I mean, if the music is good, if the environment is good, your imagination starts boiling and you want to...
The mood is right.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to hit the right tone. It's like a frequency or a wavelength. I like that. I like that feeling of reaching the wavelength. So let's talk about your first book, A Spurious Hanging. How would you describe this book?
That was me testing the waters, and I'm going to be honest, and I'm just going to come out and say it. It's not that good. However, my new writing is way better, phenomenally so. So what I did with that was, and don't get me wrong, I am very proud of writing it. I don't recommend it to people though, because the only reason why I have it up still is because I want people to see how quickly and how much my writing is improved. So when people read my good writing, they could read something from that and they could be like, oh wow, I can see how quickly he improved. You could like see and this is something a lot of authors do. You'll see if you read their newest works or their most famous works, then you go back and read their earliest works, you're like, okay, it's not nearly as good, but you could watch like their evolution. You could watch how they've grown and improved and how they've sharpened their craft. So my first novel, what I was trying to do, and I say trying very specifically, I was trying to do like a survival thriller I was trying to do like Agatha Christie meets Lord of the Flies. It was supposed to be. It's a very good Hollywood pitch. Although it was full of amateur mistakes. Although I think some of the beats were actually surprisingly good for how amateur I was. Because I did publish that when I was 17. So, and considering I wrote that when I was 15, I think it's not half bad. And to be fair, I have read works from professional full-time authors who are much older than I was at that time that are worse than my first book. So it's like, at least, okay, it's not that good, but it could have been so much worse compared to some of the stuff that somehow gets past quality control, somehow manages to get traditionally published. It's still better than some of those books. So it's like, I can still kind of see, I'm not a cup half full or a cup half empty person. I see a cup and I see two halves and I say half of it is empty and half of it is full.
Right. And one of the things that got us talking was actually we were on Parler and I shared this video that I did. I think it was the Philip K. Dick one. And you were so eloquent in your responses that I said, "Oh man, I gotta chat to this guy. He knows."
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're here. But it was so evident that there was a lot to say about this beautiful endeavor of world building. One of my favorite quotes on imagination is by this author called Cynthia. I'm going to butcher her last name, by the way. Cynthia Ozick. Or Ozick, I don't know how it's pronounced.
Is it with two Z's?
No, it's O-Z-C-I-K, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a weird one.
Sounds Slavic.
Yeah, it does. And her quote is this. This is one of my absolute favorite quotes that I keep close to my heart all the time when I'm having trouble writing specifically, which is, the highest use of imagination. Oh, sorry. See, not that close. It's actually, to imagine the unimaginable is the highest use of imagination. And I love this. Quote? Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So this is from my hero Don Quixote himself, and it was, what is madness? To be too sane could be madness, but maddest of all, to see the world as it is and not as it should be. Oh yeah. Yeah, well, I think these two kind of connect in the mind of the storyteller and the world builder. A lot. Well, not everybody is into writing. A lot of people are into reading, but I'm always fascinated when I see a piece of work that seems like it was always there. And I hinted
on this point. I alluded to this point in my previous video about how I consider a story successfully told, be it in movies or books or games, is when it feels like it was already there. You know, it feels like it's fluid. It unravels.
It's lived in.
Yes. And it's so real in your mind when you're watching or reading that it feels like it was real before the writer created it. But that's not the case, right? I mean, nobody really knows where these insights come from. But let's just assume it's all fictional for now and say that staring at an empty page and deciding that you're going to build a world that doesn't really exist outside of your imagination.
That's daunting.
That is daunting, yes. So I was going to ask you something on that point. You wrote a lot of essays, you wrote a lot of gaming articles, and because of our apparent, but we were talking off air, our apparent love for open worlds and fully flashed out worlds, did this help writing articles for games or about games? Did this help you when it comes to world building in your own stories?
You know, I've never actually thought about that connection, but now that you pointed out, I think it absolutely has. The reason why I would say that it most likely has is because there are things that are strengths and weaknesses between each of the mediums. So one thing I see a lot is there's a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to storytelling in video games, for example.
Oh, yeah.
I make no such distinction because I could see the strengths and weaknesses between cinema, books, and video games. So I don't want to talk your ear off too much about this subject.
Oh,
but
please do. This is why we're here.
in case, when it comes to these, for example, what movies and TV shows have as a visual medium that books don't is they can instantly set the scene. Mm-hmm. So with a book, you would have to have paragraphs upon paragraphs of narrative description in order to convey even comparable amount of information. Whereas with a TV show or a movie, you could set the scene instantly. So this is something that I think Adventure Time does really well, if you're familiar with that animated show.
I've heard of it, but I've never watched it.
Yeah, so they're actually incredible at this. They follow the rule. It's essentially poetry. Adventure Time is basically poetry. What they do is they compress incredibly complex ideas, and then they express them in these very deep stories crammed into tiny 10-minute segments, kind of like how a poem might encapsulate a much more complicated idea in a very short set of stanzas. And how it does this is with the art of compression. So with compression, the idea is to essentially maximize the amount of information that can be conveyed in the least amount of time. Mm-hmm. So one example that I always come back to when talking about how Adventure Time uses visual format as a way to compress information is there was one episode where the main characters are trapped in a treehouse and they're playing a game and there's no power. And they set the scene in like literally 2.5 seconds. It shows a dagger storm. So this is like a fantasy world where weird things happen all the time.
Oh, wow.
There's 1 second or like 1.5 seconds where it just shows daggers falling outside. And you already have a reason why they can't leave the house. So it's like, in order to do that in writing, you would have to like explain, like, there's a dagger storm. Here's what it looks like. Here's how it's happening. And they're able to do it in like 1 second. Like, it's instantly. It's only been 2 seconds. You already know why they're trapped inside and why things are happening the way they are. And then they launch into some dialogue and stuff. But there are things that visual formats can't do. So books are really good at exploiting the other senses besides sight and sound. With movies and TV shows, you can't really explore smell or taste very well. You could show the person taking a bite of something and going, "Ew, yuck," but that's about it. You can only show like their reaction. Whereas with a book, it's much more natural to show how something tastes or how something smells. You can go into those weird senses that we don't really tap into. Mm-hmm. And then video games, this is a complicated one, but video games, they have something even more intricate that can't really be done very well with either movies or books. And that's environmental storytelling. And the reason why you can't do it with books is because you would have to literally tell them what's about it. Mm-hmm. So it's like if there's a subtle detail in the background, you would have to write, and this detail was in the background. Like, you would have to literally tell the audience that it's there. With a TV show or a movie, you could subtly hide stuff actually in the background, and maybe they won't, not all of them will notice. Pixar movies are really good at that, at this like little Easter egg stuff. But with video games, it's so much more powerful. The best example I could think of would be like in The Witcher 3, and The Witcher 3 is full of these, but one good example is when you arrive in this area called Skellige, there's a woman, I don't remember what she did. She committed some horrible crime, it was like murder or something like that. And so they tell her that as punishment, she's going to be chained to a rock in the middle of the ocean, and she's going to be left to die in the ocean. So, but then later on, if you're exploring on your boat, it's a very small little detail, so most people miss it. They probably don't even come in this area. But if you're paying close attention, you actually find a rock, and you're like, "Hey, what's on that rock? There's something there." And if you get closer, you'll see that it's a woman chained to the rock, and she's like a skeleton now. So it's like little details like that are so easy to miss. That's environmental storytelling. You're literally telling the story of what happened to someone, or what events transpired with the environment itself. And because it's interactive art, how much each player's experience is going to be different, because each player is literally interacting with it differently. With books and TV shows and movies, you have an emotion, you interact with them emotionally, but you're not generating an input that goes into the art itself, whereas with video games that is the case.
Hey there, here's a good opportunity to click that subscribe button and leave a like if you're enjoying the conversation so far. Also, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Minds, Discord, you name it, I have it. Just scroll down to find all the links to my platforms, choose your favorite, and meet me there. There's a lot more coming, so let's get to it. Okay, I have an idea to throw your way, but before I do that, I'm just going to tell our viewers or listeners that I showed you on IMDb just now what Adventure Time is. For people listening on Spotify and my other podcast platforms, I suggest that you look on IMDb, look for Adventure Time. I actually had watched this cartoon, one episode, but it was in the middle, so I didn't get anything. And I decided, all right, this is not for me, probably. But now that you described it, it does present a lot of evidence of having a really good ability to, just the idea of raining daggers. It's a fantastic world where pretty much anything can happen, apparently. And I was reading the synopsis here. A 12-year-old boy and his best friend, wise 28-year-old dog with magical powers, go on a series of surreal adventures with each other in a remote future. So just the idea of surrealism, it opens up the door for a whole number of different and surrealistic experiences. But they all have to do one thing, which is, again, something else that Robert Mckee insightfully put, which is you can't break the rules of the world you're building. You can do anything when you're writing a new story set in a universe that nobody else knows. But once you set that universe, do not break the rules that you created. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. With that, now we're talking about logical consistency. So this is something that has always bothered me. And that's when people say that fantasy, it's fantasy, it doesn't have to be realistic. That feels like such a gross oversimplification for me, because it's like, well, all the fantasy I like the best was great because it was realistic. And it's like, that sounds oxymoronic. It's like, well, how can fantasy be realistic? And I say
verisimilitude.
I've never heard that word, but it sounds fancy, so I'll pick that one up.
I'll tell you about that word in a minute.
So it's like, it reminds me of something a caricature artist once said. So a caricature artist, one thing that they'll tell you, any good caricature artist worth their salt, is that they have the ability to draw a picture of you that looks more like you than you do. And you might say, well, that's not possible. How could they draw something that looks like me that looks more like me than I do? It's because they take all the features that make you distinct, that make you stand out, and they emphasize those. But then they take all the traits that are more generic, that don't highlight your individuality, and they remove them. So when the caricature artist draws a person, they're drawing like a pure distilled version of that person and their characteristics. They're removing all the excess crap. So when it comes to storytelling, and this goes for fantasy, but I guess this also applies to all fiction, not just fantasy and sci-fi. But when it comes to writing fiction and fantasy in particular, the best thing about it is that you're essentially doing that with reality. You're creating a mimicry or like a portrayal of reality that's more like reality than reality is. And we do this by removing all of the stuff that makes reality more boring and uninteresting. And we just keep the things that we are little anecdotal truths that people know about. We just keep all those interesting defining characteristics. So one good example is dialogue. People are always like, how do I write realistic dialogue? It's like, okay, you don't want your dialogue to be too realistic. Because if it's too realistic, it's going to be full of ums and buts and people talking in circles and people going off tangent, and then the plot will never move forward. And no one wants to read that. So it's like, how do you write convincing dialogue that's also interesting? And that's how you do it, is you keep all the interesting stuff that makes it distinct, but then you just remove all the stuff that is generic and quote-unquote realistic. And then you do this process with the whole story. You're essentially creating a caricature of reality.
Well, that reminds me, we're going heavy on quotes today, but you reminded me of something that Hitchcock said, which was, I think he put it brilliantly. He said, somebody asked him, what makes a good movie? And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along these lines. A good movie is like life, but with the boring bits cut out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Tarantino is great at that. That's why I like Tarantino so much. We do have a little bit of wiggle room with that. Like, for example, with like your Spielbergs and your Tarantinos, you're going to have characters that they're more sharp on their feet and they're more witty than people are in person. We have clumsy tongues and we trip over ourselves. So we don't have the liberty to be as instantly witty and sharp as these people are. But that's one of the small suspensions of disbelief that we're able to make.
But that's why it's exciting as well.
Exactly, because it's much more engaging. I think it's also good for the viewer too. I remember when I was like 14 or 16 or something like that. I watched MASH. I think I just binge watched all of MASH.
Yeah.
And I just remember, as soon as I had watched all of MASH, I was a much funnier person. And I think I was much more dull before I watched MASH. And I think it's because seeing how sharp and sarcastic they were, I think it just my attempts to mimic them have been fruitful, because being exposed to them, it's like if you aim for the stars, maybe you'll hit the moon. So I think we see these slightly unrealistic characters who are much more eloquent than we are, but by seeing them and somewhat replicating them, we can get pretty close.
Yeah, but that eloquence is also a muscle that you train, and you trained it through experience. The more you experience, the more you'll learn, and then you get new perspectives on something that was a problem or funny, and you can. It's like we've always heard in theater or in writing and movies, the difference between a dramatic story and a comedic story is perspective. It's not the plot, it's not the characters, it's just a matter of perspective. What angle are you going to approach this story? And this reminds me of another quote. God damn. Whoa, this is the quote show. But it's a piece of wisdom that I also carry close to my chest, but I'm going to remember this one correctly, which is from Seinfeld, actually. And he said, life is a series of misinterpreted comedies.
Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. You'd probably like Jonathan Ames at that point then, too. If you've ever read any of his work.
I haven't.
He's written what many consider to be the funniest book of all time. So this is a little challenge I set for myself, and suffice to say, I kind of failed. So I should go back to this challenge and complete it properly. But at one point, a few years ago, I looked up, I wanted to read the best book of every genre. So I was like, okay, what is the consensus on the best fantasy book? What is the consensus on the best romance story? What is the consensus on the best horror story? What is the consensus on the best comedy story? So I wanted to do that. So I started with comedy first, and I found this guy Jonathan Ames. I had never heard of. So it's like, okay, if he's the funniest in the world, why haven't I heard of him? But whatever. So, so his book Wake Up, Sir was voted as the funniest book ever written.
Guess what? I'm on Goodreads, and I'm sorry. I just want to say I'm on Goodreads, and I just typed in Jonathan Ames. That was the first hit. Wake Up, Sir.
Yeah, Wake Up, Sir. I've read pretty much all of his books by now, but that was the first one I started with, and it was without a doubt probably the funniest thing I've ever read. But it is all a matter of perspective, because this guy's life is tragic, yet it's funny to us because we're not him.
Yeah.
So it's portrayed. His series of unfortunate events is comedic to us.
Oh, by the way, you just mentioned one of my favorite titles. A Series of Unfortunate Events is a great title. Yeah, it is a great show. One thing that you mentioned, and then I came back with the word verisimilitude. Well, I think when we talk about how can fantasy be realistic, it hinges on this concept of verisimilitude. And I remember this word very clearly because I'm an addict when it comes to making of documentaries of movies. And one thing that was that Richard Donner mentioned in the making of the Christopher Reeve, the first Superman with Christopher Reeve, was that his whole goal was to make people believe that a man could fly. That's why the slogan of the movie is "You will believe a man can fly." And he ran into this word, verisimilitude, which basically means it's the characteristic of realism. When you see something that is realistic, it has verisimilitude. It is endowed with verisimilitude, which also comes from the Latin word veritas, which is the ancient word for truth or truthful.
Oh, it's all coming together now.
Yeah, and he actually had this when he was working on the production of the first Christopher Reeve Superman. He had this board printed out with Superman, like a cartoon version of Superman, swooshing up into the air over the words verisimilitude. Is how do I make this real? How do I make people believe that this can be real? And you can take that example, one of the examples, because it's one of the examples that I often mention when I tell people about how can fantasy be realistic. And one of my favorite moments of that movie is when Superman hovers down to help a little girl whose cat is stuck up in a tree. And he flies up just a few feet above the air, grabs the cat, flies back down, hands it to the little girl, and once when he's about to fly off into the night sky again, she says, "Thank you, Superman," and right in mid-air, he stops, turns around, and he says, "You're welcome, little girl, never have to thank me," or something like that, and he flies off again. So that moment when he stops in mid-air and turns back, that's when I believed, wow, a man can fly. Because it's easy to make a man fly with green screen. It's not that easy to make him stop in midair with that level of realism, and right in front of your eyes, you see what a man who could fly can do. So this is just a very small example. We're talking about world building and fantasy. This is much more complex than this little anecdote, but it does paint a picture, I think.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. It almost
it's the little details, basically.
Oh, yeah. And I think a large part of what makes fantasy seem realistic or not realistic is how it handles what we call external and internal logic. So internal logic is the rules that you make up within the story. So if you say people can only use magic on Sundays, right. And then if you're consistent with that and Monday through Saturday people are unable to use magic, then you are following your own consistency. However, if you break that, now it's no longer realistic because you've broken your own internal logic. But then you have external logic, which of course is the logic that exists outside of the story. So that would be like if you have a story where there's something that's like an unspoken rule and it feels like it's being broken without being explained. So one example of external logic would be vampires getting their strength after sucking blood. So even if you've never said in the story this is a rule, vampires get stronger after drinking blood. If you have a scene where a vampire drinks blood and then let's say they're injured and then they capture a human, they drink their blood, and now their injury goes away and they heal. If it was any other circumstance, that would feel cheap. It would feel too convenient. It would feel contrived. But because of the external logic of vampires drink blood and that's how they get their powers or whatever, even if it's just a vague understanding that vampires somehow get powerful from blood, that's enough to justify that for a lot of people. So what makes fantasy unrealistic is if it breaks its internal logic, so its own rules, right. If it breaks external logic without setting it up. So in order to break external logic, you have to do a lot of setup. So it's like, okay, I have my own vampires, but they don't get stronger after drinking blood, and they also aren't afraid of garlic, and they can see the reflections. At that point, you might as well just make up your own creature, because you're gonna have to do so much explaining to differentiate how your vampires are different from pop fiction vampires, that at that point you might as well just make up your own creatures. So it's like Game of Thrones did that with zombies. They said these aren't zombies, these are White Walkers. They absolutely are zombies, but they're zombies with special rules. So it's just easier to call them something different, because if we call them zombies, then we have to say they're zombies except this and this and this and this and this. And then it's like, okay, well, how different do they have to become before we stop calling them zombies? You know?
Right. That reminds me of all of the vampire movies that in which I heard one of the characters say, "Oh, don't believe," when he was asked, "Oh, but if he's a vampire, you can't see his reflection," and the reply was always, "Oh, don't believe everything you see in the movies," and that just opens up, the audience the idea
that's
that
a good way to just kind of brush off.
Just brush it off. You know, that mythology, that centuries old mythology. You know what? I'm going to do something different. I'm going to invent I'm going to discover fire once again. No, but I'm joking, of course. People have, you as an artist have all the creativity, all the creative freedom to do whatever you want. But your point stands still. How far, it's like different species, you know? How far does, members of a species have to diverge biologically so that you can call them a different species, right? It's basically, biology says when they can't produce offspring. If they can't produce offspring, they're two different species. But this is just a biological analogy.
Even that isn't perfect, though. Even that, because then you could say horses and donkeys are two different species, yet they can still produce offspring.
Oh, right.
Produce offspring. Mules can't produce offspring.
Right. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
It's like, where do we draw the line with that? You know,
I actually think you're right. Yeah.
We did draw the line. We decided they're different species, but it's kind of funny to look at it like that.
No, but you're right. You're actually right. I think I was confusing my concepts, but you're right. Well, the point stands. The point is that how much can you drift from the original mythology until you call it a different creature?
Well, actually, I think whether or not they can have offspring and their offspring can have offspring is a pretty good starting place, because it's like humans and monkeys share 99% of the DNA, but you're not going to knock up a monkey, no matter how hard you try.
Oof! Wow, thank you. Let me just pour a little acid in my eyeballs.
Not to crush any dreams out there for anyone that was
my God,
to one day have that.
There's something you mentioned before that I want to touch upon, which is I agree with you to a certain extent. But because I worked in different mediums, I worked in theater, film, and writing and literature. So I have these different perspectives on something that you said, which is it's easier to evoke certain emotions when you write than when you make a movie. Like, for example, tastes and smells. I had a little school when it comes to writing for film when I saw the movie Sideways. Let me just pull it up for video viewers, for viewers and not listeners. Let me just Sideways. For people who don't know this movie, it is an amazing movie with Paul Giamatti and Thomas Hayden Church. And it's it's a wonderful, wonderful movie. It's like I'm going to send you the link and you're going to watch it and we can talk about it next time if you want.
All right.
But basically, it's about these two friends who go on the California coastline. They love wine, and they go on a really long wine tasting because one of them is getting married, and as a bachelor party, these two guys decide to go and try as many wines as they can along the Californian coastline. But the amazing thing is how the movie was able to stimulate my taste as an audience member when they described wine. This is the movie responsible for me drinking wine these days, because I never really liked wine. Yeah. I never really understood. It was, for me, it was because the way they describe wine has a lot to do with the way they enjoy life. And when they start peeling layers off of their tasting, they are actually peeling layers off of their own character. This is why I like this wine. This is why I like that wine. And so it's a very intricate relationship between wine, the wine you like, and the way you enjoy life. And that, to me, was a school on how to stimulate a sense, one of the five senses that isn't the visual one, which is the most stimulated in the movie, in an audience through writing. So I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'm going to recommend you watch this movie because it's a really good lesson on how you can, in a primarily visual form, you can actually stimulate other senses. But it has to do, obviously, with really good directing, really good character direction. You have to have a great cast that knows what the scene is and produce that level of realism when they are engaging with the elements in the scene.
Yeah, that's a pretty tall order. And it made me think of something else, too. I think there's something. I think there's even. I think this goes a little bit deeper, even though I haven't seen the movie. Just off of what you've told me so far, what you seem to have just described is them being simultaneously at the top and the bottom of the pyramid of abstraction. So when you have
what?
ideas,
Excuse me, the top and the bottom of the pyramid of what?
Of abstraction.
Oh, abstraction. Yes.
So how it works is you have ideas, you can tier them into a pyramid, and so you essentially get something. Oh, hold on one second. Okay, so it would look something like this. You have concrete ideas at the bottom. So this would be immediate things like it was blue or it was green, or that would just be the kind of the equivalent of just telling someone something. Then you have abstract ideas like love would be a very abstract idea. And one way to get away with abstract ideas is to pair something at the top of the pyramid with something at the bottom. So in order to get across abstract ideas, you have to earn it. So you can't just go, you don't want to have a movie that or a scene that launches straight into abstract concepts or anything like that. You want to pair bond it with something that's concrete. So what they did was, it sounds as if they're essentially describing things that are kind of abstract. So taste is somewhat abstract because you can describe taste to some extent and people will understand it, but it's like describing color to a blind person, you know? Like how would I describe the color pink to a blind person? That's like describing a taste of something. If I've never tasted this wine and they're describing the taste to me, that's a very abstract sort of concept. So they have to pair it with concrete acting, concrete camera photography and cinematography. And so they're just using all of the concrete stuff to reinforce the abstract stuff in order to make it more compelling to the viewers so that they don't feel like they're just being kicked out of the movie.
I like what you say about conveying abstract concepts, but it has to have a footing on reality. And that reminds me of one...
it has to be physically present also in order for them. So it's like if we see the actor, like let's say something tastes bad, if instead of just saying that it tastes bad, if they're behaving in such a way that reinforces that, like if they spit it out right after tasting it, then we could kind of gauge this abstract idea better. Because now we're pairing the abstract concept of what it tastes like with how they are interpreting it in the scene.
Now you've touched upon one of my greatest pet peeves about most movies these days. Not just these days, but it's so prevalent these days, which is they take audiences. Well, yeah, sure, I'm going to try and be clear about this, but they take audience for granted in the sense that they take it for granted that audience will immediately understand the concept of, for example, love. If one character says "I love you" to another character on screen, those are empty words unless it's sustained by something real. And like an empathetical or an empathic action, it doesn't even need the words. So that's what it reminds me of. For you can show, this is something that I told friends of mine who are also writers and directors. I told them, you don't need to show love through words. Love is shown through everyday actions. People will engage with that.
And that also is kind of that's kind of what cliche is.
Exactly.
Do you ever watch this YouTuber, The Closer Look? Do you ever watch him?
Oh, no. Let me look it up.
Oh, you might like him. He has a video on cliches. It's only like 10 minutes long, but it was very helpful. Essentially what he described is a cliche becomes a cliche instead of just being a common trope once it loses its original meaning. So the example he used in his video essay, I think it was the cliche of the deer. They turned around like a deer in headlights or something like that. Or they froze like deer in headlights. When we read that sentence, we don't play that out in our heads and imagine it. We just see the cliche for what it is. It's just empty. It's lost its original meaning. So it's like when someone says "I love you," that doesn't mean anything in a movie or a book because we have to see it. So, and also because there's different types of love, of course, because it's an abstract concept. So you have to. It's like a movie where I'm going to use "I Am Legend" and I'm going to spoil it for you. Sorry about that.
No, I've watched it.
When the dog dies, that's incredibly sad because of how they've shown how much he loves that dog. No, it doesn't start the movie off with, "By the way, you're going to be sad because he loves his dog." You know. but they earned that moment through showing us with concrete storytelling. So that's a very specific type of love. The way a person loves their dog when they're the last two creatures on the planet is very different from having a crush on somebody, or which is also very different from someone being married for 50 or 60 years. You know, those are all different types of love. So merely saying I love you is basically a cliche, because it's, even though it's not a trope, so you can't call it a cliche because it's not a trope, but it's the same concept of it's empty, it's lost its original meaning, you have to show it.
Yeah, that also reminds me of the importance of inner conflict. I was thinking about the exact opposite, which some people will say. I understand when people say that it's... actually, I'm not going to say this. What I'm going to say is some people think that the opposite of love is hate. Other people think it's fear.
It's nothing.
I'm more inclined to think it's fear, and fear breeds hate, instead of just going all the way to hate. I think the genesis is fear. But anyway, let's make it simple and say that hate is the opposite of love. So when you say on screen, when a character says to another, I hate you, unless it's supported by something, it's empty. Now, here's an interesting exercise. Mind exercise, an imagination exercise. Is it more compelling to see a character say, I hate you to another character, or watching a character not say, I hate you to the other character? Even though we, as the audience member, we know how much hatred that character...
Oh man, you're touching on a lot right now.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what that inner conflict does. Go ahead.
That's also ties into not just showing the concept, but also showing the character. Because, for example, one thing with love and hate, this applies to both of them, and most emotions. But seeing how you can understand your character better by showing how they interact with that emotion. So if one character, when they have a crush on somebody, the first thing they do is tell them, "I love you." That's very telling about what type of character or what type of person that character is. Likewise, if someone hates someone else. This is also called dramatic irony, when the audience knows things that the characters don't.
Exactly.
So it's like if we see a bomb under the table, but the characters don't know about it, we're like, stop talking, there's a bomb under the table. So that's dramatic irony. So if you have a character that hates another character, but they don't say it, there's a lot to unpack there, because now we have dramatic irony. Now we could say, oh, we know that Brad hates Trevor, but Trevor doesn't know that. But it's also telling us about the first character, because now we're saying, okay, so they're the type of person to bottle it up and become resentful. So you could also explore how they express hatred. So if they act like they're chummy with someone even though they hate them, maybe later on they just keep bottling it up until it just boils over, and they do something really passive aggressive, like maybe they slash their tires on their car or something. So all that stuff, showing them and showing how they hate or how they love, is much more powerful than just telling us, because it's also revealing about the character. So
exactly.
It goes into the specifics of the emotion and the character.
Exactly. And this is so interesting, because I've been making movies on different topics, and I keep coming back to this notion, which is the importance of creating a bridge of empathy between the movie, the book, or the play and the audience. The audience needs to empathize, otherwise the moment is not important, unless they can see themselves in that moment, even if it's through characters that are so different from you that you would not even be in that moment. But you get to experience the moment through that character, and for that, you need empathy. And empathy is easier shown in movies through actions than words, because words can be empty, right? You can, like I said before in a recent video I did, you can make a character, so a character can say something and do exactly that. It can say something and do it the exact opposite. It can say something and do nothing, or can say nothing and do plenty. So it's a very simplistic
I like that.
Four-tier strategy where it just makes clear what the complexity of a character can be. So now that you know this, in what situation is your character going to say, I love you or I hate you? Now you get to decide, because if they say, I love you, when they are trying to showcase love, that is not only just redundant, it's uninteresting, it's not engaging. You can expect it, and for that reason, it's not going to be exciting. And one movie that I think did this really well was The Perfect Murder from 1998. The 1998 version is actually remake of a 50s movie. I can't remember the exact year, but it's with Michael Douglas, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Viggo Mortensen. And,
why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, I have the synopsis right in front of me. So on IMDb, the synopsis reads the following. A wealthy Wall Street speculator discovers that his wife has a lover. He investigates him and uses the character and stick to make him murder his wife. Planned to detail, it seems like a perfect murder. Now, one of the most the movie itself is exciting. You really don't know what's going to happen, but they really did a great job showcasing the kind of relationship that Michael Douglas has with Gwyneth Paltrow, the couple in the movie. And they say "I love you" when they don't mean it, and you can totally see that, and that's why it's engaging. It's again dramatic irony. We know that you hate each other, but you stick with it. How many of us in so many situations in our lives are in a circumstance where we hate the circumstance, but we stick with it for some reason? We have something to gain. There is also the notion that everybody has an agenda, and it's through empathy that you expose those agendas and you see yourself in the character's shoes. Does this make sense?
Oh yeah, and I'm going to try to contain myself because I just have so much to say about this. So let's go back to Quentin Tarantino now.
You don't have to contain yourself, by the way. Feel free to go overboard.
So there's this. So what you described can actually all be summarized in one single word. Do you know what that word is?
Oh, I told you verisimilitude. It's your turn.
Okay, this word it's a much simpler word to pronounce. Subtext.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because subtext is what's not being said. So whenever characters are interacting with each other, subtext is the conflict that we can understand and see, but it's not being explicitly told to us or to the characters that are interacting with each other. So Tarantino is the master of this. Whenever what he does is this is probably the simplest way to create subtext, but it's also one of the most efficient ways to do it. That's just to simply put them at cross purposes from each other. So one person wants one thing, someone else wants a different thing, but they're mutually exclusive, so they can't both get what they want. And so even if they're being cordial and friendly, there's still going to be some sort of conflict in how they talk with each other, how they interact with each other, and how their intentions conflict with each other. So I wasn't planning on talking much about my own writing, but now I kind of have to.
Oh, go ahead.
We're talking about subtext. So my character, what I've done, I've made
this is
a lot harder
Enid.
For myself.
It's in the next. Yeah, you're talking about the next book, yeah?
Yes, I'm talking about Enid. So what I've done here is my main protagonist, she's incapable of lying.
Oh.
So that changes the whole subtext game, because now she doesn't have the ability to really be subtle if she doesn't want to clamp down on her tongue. So her options are, if someone asks a question, her options are don't answer at all, say I'm not going to tell you that, or just flat out in the most unsubtle way possible say the exact truth as she perceives it. So if someone says, "Hey, do you love me?" her options are 1, stay silent, B, say I refuse to answer, I plead the fifth, or I love you. Like there is no other.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to create some interesting circumstances with that. But yeah, one thing about subtext I think is interesting is how you could show it in visual versus book format. So with visuals, body language plays such a strong role in subtext. It's like, are you familiar with with what's it called? Actually, I'm not even familiar with it. I forgot what it's called. There was this essay I read about why we have gut feelings, and it's essentially that we have you have a whole ecosystem of microbacteria that interact with each other, and your hormones are directly affected by this bacterial tract, and they're incredibly accurate, or I guess I would say they're really observant. So some tests found that that when asked who do you want to win the election, people would say who they want to win. Then they say who do you think is going to win. Most people, it was like 70% of the population got it correct. It was like you had a 70, even though those two candidates, you don't have a 50% chance, you have a 70% chance of getting it correct, because if you trust your gut feeling, you're usually going to be much more accurate that way. So I feel like even if if it's incredibly subtle, like the actors aren't putting on weird faces and they're not making exaggerated motions with their body, if they just have very subtle little bits of body language, even if we can't put our finger on what it is, like we can't point to the screen and say that gesture right there means he's lying. Like even if we can't do that, we'll just subconsciously pick it up. We'll just be like, it seems like he's lying, but we can't explain why. But that's our gut feeling. That's our guts telling us, because that we observed all of this tiny little details. It's compiled together in our subconscious, and then that's how it manifests itself. Is it goes, something's wrong with that guy. He's lying. I don't know why he's lying, or I can't point to the thing and say this is the part of his body language that means he's lying. Some actors are very bad at that, like some directors too. Like they don't have any subtlety, but that subtlety is actually all you need, because if it's like just the tiniest little bit, almost everyone will pick up on it. So that's one way to show subtext.
I think,
and then with books,
sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say that I think you touched on a possible biological explanation for empathy, which is interesting.
Yeah. Oh, that's true too. I didn't even think of that. It's like you see how they're on our screen, and it's like I can't explain exactly why, but I like them. I like that person, or I trust them. So that, and also good acting is really important with that. With books, you have the liberty of not needing good actors, but you have to have.
I disagree. I think that I only in one. I understand what you mean, but it's actually related to one thing I tell people who are not familiar with the process of writing is to be a really good writer. You also have a bit of you also have to be somewhat of an actor. You have to be able to put yourself in the character's shoes and act out that moment, even if it's just in your mind, to understand what would be the honest decisions that character would make.
Although in that case, I would say that the writer is also the good actor. The writer doesn't need to export or what's it called? When the word's on the tip of my tongue, what's it called when you have
externalize?
An industry, something like that. Yeah, you have like an industry, and then you have another country doing the work for you. Well, there's a word for it. It's like X something. Jeez, I'm gonna remember the second sentence. Anyway, so you don't have to externalize your acting skills to some other actor, because with a director, their director could be the best actor in the world, but unless they want to put on a wig and play on 20 different wigs and play 20 different roles, that's probably not going to end up happening. But yeah, I'd say with writing, you have the power of narrative, but then you have to use like navel gazing when they're reminiscing in their head, and then that's how you show the subtext.
Navel gazing. Also depending, I like that idea.
Yeah, but the other problem is point of view. So with writing, you have first person, of course, which is when it says I did this, I did that. You have third person limited, which is when it follows just the thoughts of one character, and then in the perspective of one character in that scene. So you could change characters. You could have more than one point of view character, but not at the same time. Then you have omniscient, which is just kind of its own cluster hell of itself.
Yeah, it's when the narrator knows everything about everybody and everything.
It's not just the narrator knows; it's that the audience also knows.
Exactly, through the narrator.
So now it's good for creating dramatic irony, because it's like if someone walks on stage and they're planning to kill somebody else, you're not going to be surprised, because they're going to enter the scene and the narrator's going to be in their head, and they're going to say, "I'm planning on poisoning all these people." So. It's like surprise gone, but now you have dramatic irony, because it's like, oh no, this person's going to poison them and they don't know. They're going to eat the soup. What should I do? Well, it's good for its own thing, but creating subtext is a lot different between those perspectives.
Listen to the entire podcast for free on YouTube or Spotify, and also a bunch of other places. Check the links below, pick your favorite, and boom, you're done. Also, please subscribe to the channel and smack a like if you're enjoying it so far. And why not join the conversation in the comments section below? Do it. I dare ya. Yeah, I was going to say that you actually hinted at something very interesting here that got me thinking about cognitive dissonance, which is going with the idea of gut feeling. I think that when you have a really strong gut feeling about something, I'm pretty sure that this will happen, or they will do this, or they are this kind of person. When your expectations are opposed, when they are subverted, that is what we call in the industry, in writing, in movies and whatnot, a twist. But I would say that a good twist is one that that causes this subproduct, which is an engaging cognitive dissonance. You were certain that something was going to happen in a certain way, and a good plot twist will show you that there was an equally logical way that the opposite or something different was going to happen, and then that cognitive dissonance between you being certain that it would develop toward A and it developed toward V, how did this happen? That's engaging. That's an engaging plot twist, I would say. Which is interesting.
That's a good point. Although I'd amend it very slightly because these words have actually a tremendous difference. So it's when you're intellectually positive that something will happen, but you might not necessarily have that gut feeling that it'll happen.
Right.
Because it's like,
right.
So the best way to create a twist is where the signs are there that the twist will happen, but they're so subtle that you don't consciously notice them. So it's like intellectually, when you think about the events of the story, you're like, nope, this is the only way this could happen. This is definitely what's going to happen. And then when a twist happens, it seems obvious. You're like, why didn't I see this coming? It seems so obvious. That's kind of the reaction you want to get. Now, I'm going to say something controversial. Did you ever watch Game of Thrones?
Yes, up to a point. But before we move on to Game of Thrones, let me just say one thing about the idea of cognitive dissonance, and you're basing cognitive dissonance on intellectually knowing. Here is the problem with human beings. They trust their gut feeling to a point that it becomes knowledge. I know this about that person. And that's why I called it cognitive dissonance. Even if the origin is gut feeling, the product is I know something. Intellectually, I know. What's the source? My gut. So it's also, I think that...
Yeah, I see where you're going with that.
Yeah. But anyway, Game of Thrones up until season 5, I think. Then I got the gist of what what the author was doing, and it lacked interest. It didn't engage me anymore. And I could see the things coming in my way.
I'm going to go back to what you just said a second ago real quick. So I think this actually, I don't think we could generalize all people like this. What I think we could do is we could say, this is one thing that's common in writing. It's like, you won't fool everyone, so don't try. And that's good advice, because if you do manage to fool everybody, it's because you've thought of something so random and contrived and stupid that no one
good idea.
So if it makes sense in the story, a small percentage of people are going to be able to predict it, even if you're subtle. But it's like maybe 5% or 10% will predict it, and 90 or 95% will be like completely shocked. And that's generally what you want to go for. But I'd say whether or not they expect something to happen intellectually or whether they expect it to happen because of their gut feeling, well, now that goes into the temperament of the viewer. Because if they're the type of, if they're, let's say, more agreeable, if they're, so for example, men are more disagreeable and women are more agreeable, it's like if you were to take one random man and one random woman and guess which one was more agreeable, and you guess the woman, you would be correct about 60% of the time. But the differences lie at the extremes. So all of the most agreeable people are women, and all of the most agreeable people or most disagreeable people are men. Well, if you have a viewer that's very agreeable, when presented with evidence within the story that so-and-so is actually the murderer, they're more likely to go along with that because of their agreeable tendencies, where they have that guard down. Whereas a disagreeable person would be like, I don't care if it defies the evidence, I know that person is actually the killer, and then they're going to be the So
well, that's where the craft comes in, and you get to explore just how volatile a human being can be and surprise the audience with credible volatility.
Credible volatility. I like that term.
I was gonna.
You want to go back?
We're right at the top of the hour here, and I know that we can't stay for much longer, which is a shame. There's so much more that I'd want to go into, but here's
like another 20 minutes, maybe. I think.
All right, we'll do this for another 20 minutes, which is great. Here's something you hinted at this before about the when you talked about dramatic irony. I think, again, picking up on Hitchcock, I think he was a master at this as well, and here's why. Not a lot of people know about the difference. Well, not a lot of people know how to characterize accurately what the difference is between the Hitchcockian thriller and what would most say all other thrillers. Like there's like Hitchcock and everything else, apparently. I don't agree with that notion. I'm just simplifying. But here's a good idea. Here's a good characterization of it, which has to do with dramatic irony. Thrillers nowadays will do this. they will see, for example, the scene is we're at the party and people are coming into the party, greeting each other, having a conversation. And at the very last minute, someone discovers a bomb. They only have like 50 seconds to disarm it. They call the police. SWAT storms in. They defuse the bomb at the very last second. This is what most thrillers, modern thrillers do these days. Here's what Hitchcock will do. He will show you first and foremost someone planting the bomb. This is the first thing of the movie, and then you see people coming into the party, drinking their wine, talking, and all the while, the audience is like, what the hell are you doing? There's a bomb right there. So this keeps you on the edge. And this is what Hitchcock is a master of, is just playing with your emotions, manipulating the audiences to such a frenzy that Psycho, when it came out, it had like lines that went around, I don't know, 2 or 3 blocks or something, because nobody knows what's going to happen. And the idea here, just to finish, the idea here is if you show mercy, you're probably not achieving the story's full potential. If you show mercy for the audience and the characters. So there's no need for mercy. Just go with the flow.
I like that. I was gonna say I was gonna use the same metaphor, only mine was different. So it was gonna be the bomb at the table, but it was gonna be 2 guys playing baseball. So it was, one scene is boring and one scene isn't, right? So this isn't necessarily a thriller. It's more of just a random movie scene. So this isn't a thriller specifically, but you have 2 scenes. One where 2 guys sit and they're playing baseball or they're talking about baseball cards at a table for 5 minutes, and then a bomb goes off and they all just die randomly. So you'd be surprised for like 5 seconds, right? But you'd also be like, what the hell was that? That was just random and came out of nowhere. It wouldn't be very interesting. The other scene is you see the bomb under the table and you see its timer set for 5 minutes. Now when they're talking about baseball for the next 5 minutes, that next 5 minutes is going to be agonizing.
Exactly.
It's like, why are you talking about baseball? There's a bomb under the table. So
exactly.
It also goes into something called Chekhov's gun. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, no. Please tell me.
So Chekhov's gun, or maybe it's Chekhov's gun. I can't remember how his name is pronounced.
Well, if you're talking about the author, the playwright is Chekhov.
Yes, this is Chekhov's rule. So his rule was, if someone fires a gun at somebody else, you need to show that gun long before that scene happens. And if you show a gun hanging on the wall at the beginning of a movie, that gun needs to be fired at someone else before the end of the movie. So it's like, that's how you work with the audience's gut internal sort of expectations and their reactions. If they see a gun hanging on the wall, and like maybe the camera zooms in on it for a second, they're going to know, even if they don't think it consciously, they're going to be like, okay, that gun is going to be used by someone in this room later. And then if later on they get in a big fight and there's weapons being drawn and someone pulls a gun off that wall, it doesn't come out of nowhere because it was already set up that way.
Yeah. I'm reading it actually now. For viewers, I have the Wikipedia page about Chekhov's gun right here in front of you. And for podcast listeners, I suggest you look into this, because this is a really good, apparently, it's a very good tool that you can use to create tension and agony, or at least credibility, emotional credibility. It's very interesting. I got to look into this. I've never heard of this before.
It's all about setup, and payoff, because you can't have a payoff without a setup.
Yeah, exactly. You know, one of my first drama teachers told me one thing. I did a little monologue, and I'm not going to go too long in this story. It's very simple. I did a monologue, and by the end of it, he just told me this. I really enjoyed it, but what's that on your pants? And I didn't even notice. It was the brand of the pants. And he was like, so why is that on your clothes? And I was like, well, it's the brand of the pants. I can't do anything. And he said, well, yes, you could. You could cover it and you could do something else. You could turn it inside out, whatever. The point is, you don't put something on stage that doesn't have meaning for the story.
Oh, yeah, that's a good, I mean, that's a very odd example. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
No. It was very enlightening. It wasn't upset or anything. It wasn't like, even if he was, the point is valid, right? You don't put something on stage that's going to draw the audience's attention.
I don't know. I never would have even noticed the logo on a pair of pants, because those are generally small. But maybe if it was like, let's say it was a T-shirt, and it was a T-shirt that was just like a brand, like a T-shirt, it was just like Coca-Cola or something like that.
Yeah.
Then people would be like, what's this have to do with Coca-Cola? So,
well, but he was a teacher, right? He was trying to convey an important notion, which is nothing is on stage unless it's meaningful for the story or the plot or the character.
And this also ties into, I'm going to take this a step further and say, in order to maximize efficiency, you want things to be serving as many of those purposes as you can.
Yeah.
So like, obviously this won't apply to literally everything. You're going to have some sentences that only progress the character or they only progress the plot. But there are a lot of ways where we can combine things, and then you can save. Oftentimes you can also save word count. So if a story is too long, a lot of characters or a lot of writers might find that they have redundant characters. So if they're writing an epic fantasy with like 50 point of view characters, they might find, oh, hey, 5 of these are all doing kind of similar things. What if I combined all of their personalities into just one character?
Yeah.
Finds the things that they do into one character. And so the story would get a little bit shorter by doing that, but also each scene that character is in can fulfill multiple roles because they're literally filling multiple character roles simultaneously. So it's like, maybe you have a character that's a comic relief. You don't want to have a character that's just the comic relief. So it's like maybe they're funny, but they also progress the plot, or they also teach us about the main character. They're doing other things that progress in some way.
Yeah. You know what you reminded me of? You reminded me of a movie that, oh man, I need to rewatch. It's a movie from the year 2000 called Wonder Boys, again with Michael Douglas. I'm not.
You like? Did you see Falling Down?
Did I see what? Sorry.
Falling Down.
Oh yeah, I did. I have problems with that movie. It was very good until they made it all about him. Everything was too personal. I think it was a really good movie that audiences could empathize with the common man, but then he's not a common man at the end, so that to me destroyed the credibility of him being a common man. So it destroyed the narrative.
For me, it enhanced the narrative, but destroyed him because he became the bad guy.
That's what I mean. That's exactly what I mean. He's not a common man. He's the bad guy who has a history of being the bad guy. And I don't buy that. If he was just a guy in traffic who's had enough of his life, that would be good enough for audiences to relate to. But then they made this whole thing about him having a history, and that's just, it's not everybody has a history. So it falls short. I think it defeated the purpose of the movie. It's not falling down. It's coming to terms with the consequences of what you did. You know what I mean?
I didn't see it. I've never seen it that way. The reason why I liked it so much was because I thought it was because they were very gradual. So if they had gone straight from him being in traffic to him at the end of the movie, then I would agree. But for me, it's because each layer he just snaps a tiny bit further, and each one is only a small escalation from the previous engagement that he was in. So it's like it's easy for me to believe that he was willing to attack those drug dealers with a bat after he had destroyed the merchandise in the gas station with the bat. So it's like, because it's just like a small escalation. And it's like, well, if he's willing to attack gangsters with a bat, it's not that much of an escalation for him to be willing to attack them with a stronger weapon like a gun. So for me, it was because the escalations were one after another.
That's right.
Small, gradual escalations. That's why I was able to believe it. But that's why.
That's right.
It does destroy the character, but for me, that was the whole point, because I'm not supposed to like him anymore. It's supposed to be like this isn't a redemption arc. This is the opposite. This is like a villain arc. It's like how they became bad.
Yeah, you know? No, but you just said it right there. I completely agree with you. The escalation was completely credible. It was really, really good. Which is why you didn't need that exposition of him already being a bad guy before he started falling down. That's what I mean. I mean, it's like these small incremental frustrations and nuisances that you have throughout your life that just boil to this melting point. And we start the movie with him being very close to the melting point, but then we see that this is where the common man is. And the escalation is pretty credible because every man, when he's pushed too hard, or woman, will melt and will boil like that. Why it didn't need all that backstory with the previous violence, the history of violence. That's where it fell short for me.
Oh yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. I think that was mostly just there for the viewers that weren't very attentive.
See, that's a problem. But I mentioned
kind of a problem still, because what they did was they did something it's a small crime, but a lot of writers get away with it. They did showing and telling. So so we say show, don't tell.
Exactly.
most people just tell, which is the worst possible thing you could do. They showed us, but then they also told just for the people that weren't paying attention to the show. So I do agree with that as a criticism, but that didn't ruin the movie for me. It was just like, oh yeah, this is for the dumb people.
I want to touch on 2 points that you mentioned before. One of them is combining characters for efficiency, and that's why you reminded me of this wonderful movie called Wonder Boys from, I don't know if you watched it. It's also with Michael Douglas. You never heard of it?
No, I haven't.
All right. I got a lot of links to send you after later.
Yeah.
But basically, the movie, just talking about setting the scene, I'm just going to tell you this scene setting, and that's it. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. So he's a writer. Michael Douglas is a writer, and he's writing he has his rituals as well. He's sitting at his typewriter, and he starts writing the new page. So he goes, what you do when you're at the typewriter starting a new page, you put the page number. So he goes to the upper right corner, and he goes 104, so 104. He looks off screen, and then he adds a 3. So it's not 104. He's up to 1,043 pages right now. And this is a novel that he can't seem to finish. So very little efficiency there. But the plot of the movie helps him understand why, which is, it's an amazing movie. I think it touches upon the idea of efficiency when you're creating a story. And maybe you're trying to say too many things or do too many things with too many characters, whereas you might have like fewer but more interesting characters because they have these they have a lot of dimensions to them. Instead of just having a one-dimensional crowd, you would have a small group of multi-dimensional characters. I think that's what we're going with this.
Yeah, you're true. That's completely right. And I think we could actually summarize this in a very eloquent maxim, and that's go deeper, not wider.
Yep.
So like a lot of writers, especially this is the problem with fantasy and sci-fi, they get something called worldbuilding disease, where they're like, I'm going to have 50 magic systems and 30 races, and I'm gonna world build 5,000 years of history into the lore. But it's like those procedurally generated dungeons in the old Oblivion games. It's like you could have 5,000 dungeons, but then you play through the first 5 and you're like, oh, all of them are just slightly different versions of this because it's just the same assets being recycled over and over again. And this is something that Brandon Sanderson mentioned, and it was that people would rather have like 10 really good handmade dungeons that each feel unique and interesting versus having 10,000 dungeons that are all just kind of the same. So,
yeah. So well, what you said about going deeper and not wider, I think is a great description, in my opinion, of what made The Expanse so successful. They do enlarge the world, the universe that they're building, yes, but it's not to make the plot more engaging. It's because the inner conflicts of each character are that much more demanding, or they enhance the inner conflicts, which I think is the right way to go. You don't want to expand the world just because everything else isn't interesting. If that's the case, then you might want to take a second look at what you're trying to do. But if you want to
already there, be interesting first before
exactly. And the other show that did this really well, and I keep talking about this show, but it's just that good, is Babylon 5. They did this really well. It's set on
hear a lot
one.
of good things about that show.
Yeah, it's set on one space station, and it doesn't need more. I thought it was going to be boring. It's not, because they go deep.
Oh, can I? Okay, I'm going to go a little off topic, but this it all ties in. I promise. So, so this is something that a YouTuber called Digi talked about, and it's that he asked this question, and I'm going to ask it to you just because I want to see if you figure it out. I don't expect it. It's kind of a trick question. Why do we ask people what the premise of something is? Like, why do we ask them what something is about?
You talking about a work of art, for example?
Yes, like if you said, "Hey, there's this book," and I say, "What's it about?" Why do you think people do that?
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this. So I think I see it. It depends. One thing is to ask what. I see it in two different ways because I've thought about this before. One of them is before you know what the work is about, is to have familiar footing. Will this interest me? Can I see anything that I will engage with beforehand? And I think it comes from a point of I'm gonna this is gonna escalate quickly, but I think the idea is there, which is probably a lack of courage, which means I'd rather go into a new thing knowing something beforehand instead of just discovering it by myself. And the other option is you watch the movie or you read a book and you ask the author or the creators or the cast, what did you mean by this? And I think this comes from a place of insecurity. I'm not confident enough on my own interpretation to try and make a point. I rather see if the point is right or not, when in reality there is no such thing. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You kind of did. Although I'm going to word it a little differently. What I think the thing is that we think the premise is important, even though it's really not. So part of that is the familiarity, because it's like, okay, I need to have some footing before I can step into this property. But if you really think about it, the premise is actually the least important thing of a work of art or of a piece of entertainment. So it's like the best example, anime is doing this all the time. So they'll have shows that have like the worst sounding premise on the planet, and then you'll just fall in love with it. So this is the biggest thing with slice of life shows. You can't pitch slice of life to people. You can't. Because slice of life is basically just them doing boring, regular stuff. So how do you pitch that to somebody? But it's because of the execution. It's the execution that makes it perfect.
Exactly.
So recommending something like K-On! To people, they'll be like, okay, well, what's it about? I don't know how to answer that question, because if I tell them the truth, they're not going to understand what it's really about, and then they're not going to watch the show. So if they say, what's K-On! About? And I say, it's about high schoolers goofing off in band class, that's not going to mean anything to them. They're not going to be like, oh, that sounds amazing, I'm going to watch that right now. Because it doesn't tell them about the actual appeal of that piece of entertainment. So for K-On! Specifically, the appeal is the inside jokes, the witty banter, and the setup with how I'd say like the character relationships and stuff, but that's not something that you could say in a quick, easy pitch. So, but also you have things that have an amazing premise and are absolutely terrible. So for me, I hold a personal grudge against Pacific Rim for this.
Oh Jesus, yes.
I was like, yes, a live action mecha movie. This is what nerds like me have been waiting for forever. We've never gotten a good live action mecha movie. We're finally gonna get robots fighting on the big screen, and it's gonna be great. And then they totally ruined it. So it's like you can have a great premise where something sounds great and it'll still be terrible. The great example of a bad premise but a great thing because they went deeper instead of wider would be 12 Angry Men. Have you ever seen that one?
Oh, yes, I have. Yes, of course.
Because if you were to pitch on somebody, what's 12 Angry Men about? It's about guys arguing in a courtroom. Like, it's just about the jury arguing. Like that's all it is. There's like no other settings. It's basically the whole movie is just in that courtroom. It's just a bunch of guys sitting around in chairs talking with each other at a desk. That doesn't sound good. Like, it's not a good pitch. When someone says, hey, what's this movie about? It's about 12 guys sitting at a table talking. That doesn't sound good, but the film is freaking phenomenal. It's because it goes so deep. It doesn't go wide. It only has one setting and the 12 characters, the 12 men. But because you have all that subtext, you can see their motives, you can see how their biases are dragged in from outside the courtroom into their decision making and how they argue with each other. Their relationships are so fascinating that it doesn't matter. The premise is completely irrelevant because it goes deeper, not wider.
Exactly. And you know what you do there? That's a great example of a great mechanism in storytelling, which is you put the conflict not in the characters, but directly in the audience. Because now the audience does not know who to root for if the arguments are all good. You don't know.
Yes, so, you're right. That's the opposite of dramatic irony, where the characters know what's real and what's not because they know if they're telling the truth, but we don't.
Yeah.
So it's like the opposite of dramatic irony, where in dramatic irony we know, but they don't. Well, they know, but who do we know? And that's something that mysteries are really good at. Because if you have a mystery, you don't want the audience to know because then it's not a mystery. Now it's just a thriller. Yeah,
and we're right. We're reaching the end here of this this episode, but I can't finish. I can't end this without mentioning these two properties, which I think you're gonna enjoy. One of them you probably know. One of them is Spirited Away by Hayao Miyazaki.
Yes, I actually have him hanging from my car mirror.
So there you go, and this is talking about amazing surreal plots where the actual movie is really good. Wow, you use the word. It's the making. It's not the making. It's the
Yeah, it's not the premise, it's the execution.
Execution, thank you. So the execution of this movie is so good. If you read the plot, which is right in front of me, it says, during her family's move to the suburbs, a sullen 10-year-old girl wanders into a world ruled by gods, witches, and spirits, and where humans are changed into beasts. This is, what the hell is this, right? But then you look at the movie, and oh man, you can totally understand where this world exists and why these things manifest and what the kind of grip, what kind of hold they have on the main character and what kind of choices the main character has to do to come back to a point of some semblance of control of her own life. This is so well executed. So this is my first entry to Miyazaki, and what an entry, man. Everything else seems to not reach this high bar.
Yeah, I can't blame you for that. It's a pretty good introduction, too. It's also kind of a tragic introduction because it's like, once you've seen Spirited Away, everything else feels kind of ruined.
Yeah, exactly.
I had this experience with The Witcher. I wanted, after playing, I really liked open world games, but it kind of ruined other open world games because now when I see them, I compare them, I find all the stuff that's lacking that I found in The Witcher, and I'm like, this game sucks now.
Yeah, you're talking about good plots that are wasted in the case of Pacific Rim, which I totally agree. Even though I'm not a big nerd when it comes to mechs, but it was a wasted plot.
I just expected the mecha stuff to be good, but even that wasn't good. So
yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. So I'm gonna hit you with a plot of a movie that hasn't come out yet, and it's a Shyamalan movie, so it's a hit and miss. You never know what's gonna happen. But yeah, just listen to this plot that I discovered yesterday on my live stream. And it says on IMDb, this summer, visionary filmmaker M. Night Shyamalan unveils a chilling, mysterious new thriller about a family on a tropical holiday who discover that the secluded beach where they are relaxing for a few hours is somehow causing them to age rapidly, reducing their entire lives into a single day.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with that. That is definitely a coin flip with him, because like that could be executed where you have like an entire lifetime told in a single day, and it's all encapsulated, and it uses the poetry effect of compression really well. But for all we know, it won't do any of that. For all we know, it's just a gimmick to get us into theaters, and we'll watch it, and nothing will make any sense. We won't care about the actors. We won't care about the story. All we know is that they're getting older. Yeah. We don't know how good the conflicts and the interactions are going to be. So that's a really good example, because that premise sounds great, but I can imagine it being terrible also.
Yeah, so I'm hoping for an Unbreakable, but I'm really fearful of a happening.
That's a pretty good one.
All right, so go ahead. Sorry.
Sleeper hits. This will just be my last little thing, because now I'm thinking about M. Night Shyamalan. I used to hate the movie Signs. I thought it was dumb. Yeah. Younger, I was like, why would they come to a planet full of water if water is their weakness? And I was being stupid. This movie is a freaking masterpiece.
Yep.
Because apparently, so I didn't notice this when I first saw it, like as a teenager, but with that movie, they've probably never encountered water before. And as soon as they find out that the planet is covered in the stuff and that it hurts them, they flee so quickly that they leave their wounded behind. And then like one criticism I hear is like people going, how do these aliens travel through space but they can't escape a pantry? But the alien does escape the pantry. He holds the boy hostage in the end after escaping the pantry. So it's like he didn't escape it instantly, but when he's alone and you lock him in a cellar, it's going to take him a few minutes to get out. So it's like, now I see that movie in a much different light. So I'm like, I don't know what to think of M. Night Shyamalan anymore.
Well, and those assumptions, that's where I say that your assumptions of an alien are not you specifically, anyone's assumption of an alien are always false, because we've never met an alien. So we don't know if they can be really good at traveling through space, but maybe a door is a real obstacle. We don't know. So,
we don't have any point of reference except ourselves.
Exactly.
So we're just going to be like, I can open a door. This alien is stupid because it couldn't force its way through a door that was barricaded. Like, what?
Right. So you try traveling through the void millions of light years away. Then, who's stupid now? You never know. So which raises the issue of what is intelligence. But we're not going to get into that right now. I do want to leave you with one last thing, and this is because I think it's going to be important for you for the book that you are writing. You mentioned the character that is not able to lie, and for that reason, I would like to draw your attention to a movie called The Invention of Lying with Ricky Gervais. Do you know this movie?
I don't, but I know Ricky Gervais, and I like him, so I'm assuming that I'll like his performance in this.
His performance, yes, but I want to throw this your way, and I'm going to do it now. It's not necessarily a spoiler, but it is somewhat of a veil lifter, which is the movie is entertaining, and it does, it raises a lot of interesting situations. However, the purpose of the movie is immediately destroyed right from the get-go because of one critical flaw. They mistook being truthful with being direct.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
So when you're unable to lie because you have no frame of reference of what lying is, that does not mean that you are always blunt. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, that's true. And that's what I've been trying to wrestle with. I'm like, how do I want to create subtext where she's saying things that are true, but she has different ways of saying them.
Yeah.
So you go into things like true versus honest. So
exactly.
I'm just going to spend like 30 seconds on this. You could say something that's true without it being honest. So with her, the rule is more, it has to be honest. But with this, let's say I was to say to you, did you know that dihydrogen monoxide, too much of it will kill you? That it's in the air, that it's in pollution, that it's in your house, that it can be found in pipes, and that you're inhaling small amounts of it at every moment, and that every person who's ever inhaled it has died? That would technically be factually correct. That is a true factual statement, but we're talking about water. Dihydrogen monoxide is water, so it's obviously misleading.
Yeah, but again, correlation does not mean causation.
That's true. So there was a study where some college, this has been done many times, so I'm not just going to give one example, but there have been countless times where people would, for science classes and stuff, they would run this experiment, or they would tell people about the horrors of dihydrogen monoxide. And then they're able to get most of the people that they were surveying to sign a petition to ban it. So it's like, think about how gullible people are. It's like you can convince people to ban water if you call water dihydrogen monoxide instead.
Oh, that's the problem with the disabling of critical thought.
Yeah, it's also it's a good point of reference for the difference between something being factual and something being true.
Yeah, it is
factual, but it's not true because it's misleading.
Yes, because you're withholding information. There are two different layers to that, at least two.
Lie by omission. It's still a type of lie.
Yeah, exactly. So where do you draw the line? That's going to be a hard work for you. I can't wait to see what Enid chooses to do in the midst of this turmoil between truth and honesty.
Yes, I'm very excited to show you, and hopefully not tell you.
Yes, please, yes. Listen, this was fascinating. Dylan, thank you so much for being here. We have so much to talk about still, so I hope that we can do this again sometime soon. But before you leave, I want to ask you to tell people where they can find you once again and your work.
Yes, so the main place you're going to find me, you'll find me on Parler. My handle is @TheChosenUndead. It's the same for Minds, for the people that are using Minds. And then you can find my essays on writingislikelife.com.
All right, that'll do it for today. Leave down in the comments below your thoughts on world building, on the conflict between truth and honesty, on if you're a writer, what kind of dilemmas have you gone through, how did you solve them, and also if you have any rituals that are efficient, please let us know because we sorely need some insight as to how we can overcome writer's block, as we all do. Writer's block, life block, there's a lot of blocks out there. So leave everything down in the comments below. Let's start an engaging conversation. And once again, Dylan, thank you so much for coming by, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right, see you next time. Stay classy, stay whatever you want. I don't really care as long as you're happy. Bye-bye now.